Thank you, Assembly members, so much for meeting with us today. We're really excited to be able to share some information about the California Carbon Dioxide Removal Market Development Act, or SB 308. This is legislation that we think is really important for California's climate objectives as well as its economic development objectives. And we strongly urge you to support it as a co-sponsor. We'll provide a little bit of background on the bill right now and why we think it's important, and then we can leave some time for discussion to answer your questions. SB 308 was introduced by Senator Josh Becker last year. It actually passed in the Senate. Didn't make it as far in the Assembly, but what we're hoping is this session in 2024 that we can pass in that chamber and get the governor's signature and make this important piece of legislation law. Just at the very, very sort of most basic level, we want to make sure that we define the term, what we're talking about here. Carbon dioxide removal. These are activities, as it sounds, that take carbon out of the air and put them places durably where they'll stay out of the atmosphere. And this is a whole range of different technologies, which I'll give you a sample of in just a second. But importantly, this is not carbon capture and sequestration, which it's sometimes confused with. Carbon capture and sequestration is when you stop emissions from entering the atmosphere in the first place at post-industrial sources. This is different. This is taking carbon that's already in the air out of the air. And there's many different forms of this, which I will only summarize at the highest level for you right now. But the point is just to show you that it's not one thing. It's many different things that operate in very different types of environments and involve different resources. Some are on land. Increasingly, many will be in the ocean. Some involve large centralized infrastructure. Others are highly distributed and small and add up to have a cumulative impact. Some that you may have heard of really leverage agricultural resources or existing natural resources, from biochar to algae sinking and many things in between, which are quite promising. And then we have those technologies which you could say are maybe on the higher tech end of the spectrum. And these range from purpose-built machines like direct air capture that chemically absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and a variety of other forms of technology as well that are quite exciting. So there's many different ways to do carbon removal, and they're increasing all the time. Now, why do we care about this? Why is this an enterprise worth undertaking? It's because it's necessary. That in order to really maintain a livable climate, we've already gone too far. We can't any longer just reduce emissions. That is essential. We must do that first and fastest. But we already have to also now take carbon out of the atmosphere that's already in the atmosphere. This is already settled science and acknowledged by the IPCC in its last several synthesis reports. This is just a diagram that shows you how these two fit together. These are all the emissions reductions that we have to achieve, and these are the removals under here that we have to achieve in order to get to net zero. And importantly, it's not just the IPCC that's recognizing this. It's California recognizes it. It's one of only a handful of states that already has explicitly made clear that carbon removals are essential to meeting its own net zero goals. It's implied by AB 1279, which set us on a course to achieving net zero by 2045. It's clear that there's 15% of those emissions that can't be directly abated, and those are going to have to be handled through carbon dioxide removal. In 2022, the scoping plan set out by CARB already set targets for carbon removal. 7 million metric tons by 2030 was considered attainable. And then 75 million by 2045 would have to ramp up. And again, this is within the context of the state's own net zero targets. And so what SB 308 does is it tries to fill that gap. It's already acknowledged that we need to do carbon removal, but we lack a mechanism to actually do it in the state. So the first objective of SB 308 is to create a mechanism that will support carbon dioxide removal so that we can achieve that net zero goal by 2045. And what it does is it requires major emitters of carbon dioxide to begin purchasing carbon dioxide removals in addition to cap and trade. And it would start very, very small in 2028. And then in accordance with the net zero targets, it would ramp up significantly by 2045 to when it gets to 100% of that gap for net zero would have to be reached through carbon removals by 2045. The second thing it does is that we have to acknowledge that California already has an amazing position in terms of this emerging sector of carbon dioxide removal. It is the #1 hub for carbon dioxide removal innovation and entrepreneurship already in the world. And this is going to be a future $1 trillion business. So a policy like this that supports projects and demand for that is only going to catalyze California's carbon dioxide removal sector and secure our leadership position. Right here is a project that you might have heard about just recently, a direct air capture plant that was installed in Tracy, California. And it's one of many different projects that are already underway with different forms of carbon dioxide removal in California. And again, this is just a kind of a sample of some of the companies that are already based and have started here in California. There's many, many more of them, but it is undeniably the leading hub for carbon removal in the world. And thirdly, we want to make sure that we do this right. We have to take the time to establish the criteria to make sure that we maximize the benefits that we get from carbon removal in addition to carbon removal, and that we eliminate any possibilities of risk or harm. And that is where in the bill, it directs CARB to actually take its time, a number of years, to do the research and the analysis to establish the criteria for what are eligible forms of carbon removal that can be purchased. That's in terms of what's its scale potential, what does it cost, can it be verified, how durable is it, how long is it actually, do we know that it's going to be removed from the air, and what kinds of resources in terms of energy, water, and otherwise are required to make these solutions work. And really importantly is let's quantify what are the other benefits for land, for workers, that can be quantified, and let's include that in the eligibility criteria. And let's make sure that we are absolutely clear on what risks might be for potential forms of carbon dioxide removal that we want to exclude from eligibility. And so with that, I just want to sort of show we're part of a growing and large and diverse coalition of both startups and other private sector actors, and increasingly many different civil society and nonprofit climate organizations as well. And with that, we'll pause and take your questions. And again, we want to thank you for your time, and we hope that we can have your support for SB 308. Thank you.